The inventory listed the furniture first, then the silver, then the wine cellar, what remained of it, then the debts itemized and annotated in a solicitor's careful hand, and then, near the bottom of the second page, a single line that the new Duke read twice before he believed it. One dependent, status unclear, residing in the East Wing. Thomas Ellery, the 4th Duke of Ravenscroft, set the papers on the desk that was now his, and looked out the window at the grounds that were now his, and thought about what, exactly, a dependent with unclear status was doing in a house he had just paid a considerable sum to acquire. He asked his solicitor, Mr. Graves, who had accompanied him from London for the transfer. The previous Duke's household, Mr. Graves said, with the particular tone of a man who has already explained something once and does not wish to explain it again. There was some difficulty in the final weeks. The staff was largely let go. A few remained. We were advised to leave the matter for your discretion. Whose discretion advised that? Mr. Graves looked at his own papers. The estate's former solicitor, a Mr. Fenner. He has since retired. Thomas said nothing. He folded the inventory and put it in his coat pocket, and went to find whoever was living in his East Wing. He found her in the kitchen garden. She was on her knees in the dirt, doing something with a trowel and a row of what appeared to be struggling lavender. She wore a gray dress that had been mended at the elbows, and a pair of gardening gloves that were too large for her hands. Her hair was pinned back, but not particularly well. She did not hear him approach. "Excuse me," he said. She stood up quickly, not startled, more as though she had been waiting for someone to say exactly that, and had prepared herself for it. She was younger than he had expected, perhaps 24, 25. Her face was composed in a way that seemed practiced rather than natural. "Your Grace," she said, "you know who I am. Mr. Graves mentioned you would be arriving today." She pulled off one of the gardening gloves. "I'm Sylvia. I've been keeping the kitchen garden. Is that your position here?" A pause. Not long, but he noticed it. "I help where I can. That isn't what I asked." She looked at him steadily. Her eyes were gray, or perhaps a very dark blue. The afternoon light made it difficult to tell. "I don't have a formal position, Your Grace. I've been here since before the household was reduced. I stayed on." "Why?" Another pause, longer this time. "I had nowhere else to go," she said. It was a simple enough answer. It was also, he would think later, not quite a lie and not quite the truth. At the time he simply nodded and told her she could continue with the lavender and went back inside to review the rest of the estate's rather considerable problems. Ravenscroft was not what he had expected. Thomas had purchased the estate sight unseen, which his mother had called reckless, and his solicitor had called inadvisable, and which he had done anyway, because the land was productive, and the price was better than it had any right to be, and because he was 31 years old, and had made enough sound decisions that he felt he had earned one impulsive one. The house itself was large and cold, and had the particular smell of a place that had been inadequately heated for several winters running. The portrait gallery needed new frames on half the paintings. The west wall of the library had developed an ambitious water stain that suggested a serious problem with the roof. The stables were in better shape than the house, which said something unflattering about the late Duke's priorities. The late Duke, the 3rd Duke of Ravenscroft, a man named Aldous Bellamy, had died 6 months prior, leaving behind the debts and the property and, apparently, Sylvia. Thomas did not know what to do about Sylvia. She was not a servant, or not precisely. She did not behave like one. She answered direct questions directly, which servants were not trained to do. She moved through the house as though she knew exactly where everything was, which she did. He had found that out on his second day, when he could not locate the key to the estate office, and she had produced it from a hook inside the larder without being asked how she knew it was there. She ate in the kitchen with Mrs. Paget, the only housekeeper who had remained, but she did not eat like someone accustomed to servants' quarters. She sat with her back straight and her hands still, and she read in the evenings serious books, not the novels his mother favored. He asked Mrs. Paget about her at the end of the first week. Mrs. Paget was 63 and had been at Ravenscroft for 22 years and had the expression of a woman who had long ago decided that the world's chaos was not her responsibility, but who would, nevertheless, continue to maintain the linen closet to exacting standards. "Sylvia has been here a long time," Mrs. Paget said. "How long?" "Since she was a girl. She came when she was perhaps 9 or 10, as a ward, a relation of the Duke's." Mrs. Paget folded a pillowcase with the focus of someone diffusing something. "She came quietly, Your Grace. The late Duke didn't discuss her particulars with the staff." "But you have an opinion." She set the pillowcase down. She looked at him with the expression of a woman deciding how much trouble an honest answer was likely to cause. "I think," she said carefully, "that Sylvia deserves to be asked herself." Sylvia had been 12 years old the first time she understood what she was. Not who. She had always known who she was, in the way that children know themselves without having the words for it. She knew she liked the smell of rain on stone and disliked the feel of wool against her wrists, and could identify 12 varieties of apple by taste, and cried at music but not at stories, which was, she had been told, the wrong way around. But what she was, that had taken longer. She was the daughter of Aldous Bellamy, the 3rd Duke of Ravenscroft. He had told her this himself once in a conversation she had never been able to entirely make sense of. Sitting in his study on a winter afternoon, a glass of something amber in his hand, his voice carrying the particular quality of a man speaking thoughts aloud that he had not decided to share, he had said, "You are mine, Sylvia, whatever else anyone tells you." And she had been 12, and had not known what else anyone might tell her, and so the words had sat with her unexamined for years, a stone she kept turning over and putting back. Her mother had died when Sylvia was 3. She did not remember her clearly. What she remembered was a woman who smelled like violet water, and who sang in a low voice when she thought no one was listening. What she knew, pieced together from things Mrs. Paget had let slip over the years, and a letter she had found in the estate office when she was 19, and should not have been reading other people's correspondence, but had done it anyway. What she knew was that her mother had been the daughter of a country vicar, and had met Aldous Bellamy during a summer when he was young enough to be reckless, and she was pretty enough to encourage it. They had not married. He had meant to. Or so the letter said, a letter from his own solicitor, dated 23 years ago, politely advising him of the legal and social complications of marrying below his station when his family had expectations and his title had entailments. He had kept the letter. Sylvia did not know why. Perhaps he had meant to act differently than he ultimately did. Her mother had died. Sylvia had been brought to Ravenscroft. Aldous Bellamy had raised her in a way that was not quite secret and not quite acknowledged. Present enough that the staff knew her face and the tenants knew her name, absent enough from any official record that no one outside the estate had reason to know she existed. He had been kind to her, in his way. He had educated her. He had taught her the estate's accounts and let her sit in on meetings with the land steward, and never once spoken to her as though she were less than what she was. And then he had gotten old and sick and frightened, and in his final year he had sold Ravenscroft to settle his debts. And he had died before he could do the thing he had promised her he would do. There was a letter. He had told her about it himself in the last months, when he was in bed more than he was out of it. He had written a letter acknowledging her, her full name, Sylvia Elaine Bellamy, and her parentage and his intentions. He had had it witnessed and signed. He had told her it was in the estate office, in the locked box behind the atlas, and that when the time came it would set things right. He had not told her that he would sell the estate before the time came. He had not told her that the letter would therefore belong in some sense to whoever bought Ravenscroft. She had stayed because of the letter. She could have gone. Mrs. Paget had offered to write to a cousin in Bath who ran a school and needed teachers. One of the tenants, a farmer named Holbrook, had a sister who placed respectable young women in good households in the north. There had been options, quiet and modest, and entirely reasonable. She had stayed because the letter was in the locked box behind the atlas, and because she was not ready to leave the only home she had ever known, and because she told herself that the new owner might never look, might never find it, might simply let her continue the kitchen garden indefinitely. She had known, even as she told herself this, that it was not a plan. It was an avoidance dressed up as a plan. Thomas Ellery had been at Ravenscroft for 9 days when he found it. She knew he had found it because she heard him in the estate office at 7 in the morning, when he had no particular reason to be there, and then she heard him stop moving. The silence that followed was a particular kind of silence. Not the silence of a room with no one in it, but the silence of a person who has stopped to read something they were not expecting. She put down her tea. She folded her hands on the kitchen table. She waited. He appeared in the kitchen doorway 11 minutes later. She knew because she had been counting. He was holding the letter. "Sit down," he said. "I am sitting." He looked at the letter, then at her. She watched him work through it. Not the words, she thought, but the shape of the situation. He was not a stupid man. She had established this over 9 days of quiet observation. He read before breakfast. He asked follow-up questions. He had spent an entire afternoon in conversation with Holbrook about the drainage in the East Field, and had emerged knowing more about agricultural drainage than most men who owned agricultural land. He sat down across from her. "This letter," he said, "says that you are the daughter of Aldous Bellamy." "Yes, his natural daughter." "Yes, and that it was his wish to provide for you, and to have this letter serve as a formal acknowledgement of your parentage." "Yes." He set the letter on the table between them. "Why didn't you tell me?" "What would I have told you? That you weren't a dependent with unclear status. That you were," he paused, visibly recalibrating, "that your situation was considerably more complicated than how it appeared." Sylvia looked at the letter. Her father's handwriting, the particular narrow slant of it that she had known her whole life, that she had seen on estate ledgers and tenancy agreements, and on the birthday notes he had left outside her door every year until she was old enough to know that other fathers sent proper gifts and not notes, and had found that she preferred the notes. "I was afraid," she said, "that you would tell me to leave. Before I could figure out what to do." "What is there to do?" She met his eyes. "The letter was in this house, which means it passed to you when you bought the property. I am not certain of my legal standing, Your Grace. I'm not certain I have any. But my father wrote that letter, and he had it witnessed, and he meant it to mean something. And I wasn't ready to let it be filed away and forgotten." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the lavender she had been trying to revive was catching the morning light. Thomas looked at the letter again. "He died 6 months ago," he said. "You've been here alone since then. Mrs. Paget was here. You've been here managing the garden and the kitchen stores, and what else? The correspondence with the tenants. Mr. Graves had the formal matters in hand, but there were questions about the harvest rotation, and the repair to the Holbrook fence line, and I knew the answers, and there was no one else to write back." He stared at her. "You've been running the estate." "I've been keeping it from falling apart," she said. "There's a difference." There was, she thought, a slight change in his expression then. Not softened, exactly. More as though something had been recalibrated. "Tell me," he said, "about the East Field drainage." It was not what she had expected. She had expected, in her darker imaginings, to be given a week to collect her things and find other arrangements. She had expected, in her more optimistic moments, to be treated with courteous distance and allowed to remain in some diminished capacity, while the legal matter of the letter was quietly and indefinitely deferred. She had not expected to be asked, over the following 2 weeks, approximately 40 questions about the management of an estate she had spent her entire life studying. Thomas Ellery was thorough. It was the word she kept returning to. He was thorough the way a man was thorough when he genuinely wanted to understand a thing, and not merely to appear to understand it. He walked every field. He met every tenant. He went through the estate books, going back 15 years, and asked her about every anomalous entry, and she answered because she had kept those same books for the last 3 years and knew exactly why the winter hay expenditure in 1889 was higher than it should have been, Holbrook's barn fire, and why the timber income in 1891 didn't match the forestry survey. Her father had given a portion of the wood to the village for the church, restoration, and neglected to record it as a gift rather than a sale. He listened. He wrote things down. He did not once suggest that she should not know what she knew. "You received a proper education," he said one afternoon, when she had explained the history of the water rights dispute with the neighboring property, Calderfield, that had been running intermittently for 40 years. "My father believed in it. He taught you himself. He hired tutors when I was young. Later I read on my own." She looked at the account book between them. "He taught me the land." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "He doesn't appear in the portrait gallery. Your mother?" "No, but you do." She looked up. "Third painting from the left," he said, "near the window. I noticed it the first day. I didn't understand it until I read the letter." Sylvia had grown up knowing that painting was there. A small portrait of her at perhaps 11, included in a grouping of Bellamy family likenesses, because her father had commissioned it, and because no one on the household staff had thought it their place to question him. It was not labeled. It did not declare anything. It was simply her face, in a gold frame, among the faces of the Bellamy family. He had put her there, without explanation, without announcement. Just put her there. She had not cried at it in years. She made sure not to cry at it now. "He was not a simple man," she said finally. "No," Thomas said. "I'm getting that impression." The complication arrived from London on a Thursday, in the form of a man named Harwick. Mr. Cecil Harwick, who presented himself at the front door with a solicitor of his own and a letter from a firm in the city that Thomas had never heard of, and a manner that suggested he had expected to be met with either deference or panic, and was not particularly prepared for indifference. Harwick was, he explained, a cousin of the late Duke's, a distant one. The entailed remainder, he called himself, the person to whom the Ravenscroft title would have passed had Aldous Bellamy died without selling the estate. "The estate was sold," Thomas said. "Yes," said Harwick's solicitor. "We are not disputing the sale. We are disputing the circumstances under which certain assets within the estate were retained." Thomas looked at this solicitor for a moment. "Speak plainly." "There is a matter of a natural daughter," the man said, looking past Thomas toward the hallway, as though he expected Sylvia to materialize from the wainscoting. "We have learned that the previous Duke drew up a document shortly before his death acknowledging a claim. We believe that document was drawn up under conditions of diminished capacity. We believe it may not be legally binding. And we believe that if the property includes, if the girl's presence on the property implies a claim against the estate's assets." "She has no claim against the estate's assets," Thomas said. "The estate was sold. She was not included in the sale." Harwick blinked. "Then what is she doing here?" "Living here," Thomas said. "At my invitation." There was a silence. "Your Grace," Harwick said, changing tack with the particular smoothness of a man who had practiced this, I have no wish to be disagreeable, but the girl's presence here creates questions about the late Duke's intentions, about whether there are outstanding obligations that might, in certain interpretations, encumber the property. My solicitor believes. I'm sure your solicitor believes a great deal of things, Thomas said. Some of them may even be relevant. But I bought this estate through proper legal channels, and the letter you're referencing was found on the property and has been reviewed by my solicitor, and nothing in it constitutes a claim against anything that belongs to you, which, as far as I can determine, is nothing. Harwick's face did something complicated. The girl's situation, he said, lower, could be embarrassing. For everyone, I'm not embarrassed. The county, Thomas said, has not been consulted. He showed them out. He found Sylvia in the library that evening. She had heard, he could tell. The house was not large enough for raised voices to be entirely private, and Harwick's solicitor had been a man who believed that volume was a substitute for persuasion. She was sitting in the chair by the window with a book open in her lap that she was clearly not reading. "You didn't have to do that," she said when he came in. "I know. Whatever he's implying, whatever legal theory his solicitor has constructed, I'm not going to pursue any claim against you. I want that to be clear. The estate is yours. I've never disputed that. I know that too." She looked at him. In the evening light, her eyes were definitively gray. "Then what are you doing?" He sat down in the chair across from hers, the same configuration as the kitchen 2 weeks ago, with the letter between them. There was no letter now. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the portrait." She waited. "He put you in the gallery," Thomas said. "Not in the attic, not in the estate office, not tucked in a box where no one would ever see it. In the gallery, with the rest of his family." He knew what he was saying. He just didn't say it loudly enough. "He was afraid," Sylvia said. And then, because she had spent 24 years understanding this man who had been her father, she said, "He wasn't a brave person. He was a good person, mostly. But not a brave one." "The letter is legal," Thomas said. "My solicitor has reviewed it. It was witnessed. It was signed when he was in full possession of his faculties. Whatever Harwick's man implies, it acknowledges your parentage. It doesn't give me anything material. No, but it tells the truth." He paused. "I want to enter it into the public record, formally. I want there to be no question, no future question from Harwick or anyone else, about who you are." Sylvia was quiet for a long moment. "Why," she said, "does it matter to you?" It was a real question. She was not being modest or deflecting. She genuinely wanted to know. He took his time with the answer, because it deserved a real one. "Because I've spent 2 weeks learning this estate," he said, "from the woman who kept it alive after everyone else left. Because you knew the water rights history going back 40 years and the name of every tenant's eldest child and exactly why the hay expenditure was wrong in 1889. Because your father put your face in that gallery and then didn't do enough to make it mean something, and that seems like a wrong that someone should correct." He stopped. Then, more quietly, "And because you looked at that letter on the kitchen table and you didn't ask me for anything. You just waited to see what I would do. I thought that deserved an answer." The fire was burning low. Outside, the grounds were dark, and somewhere in the direction of the home farm, the resident bull, an enormous placid creature the tenants called Wellington, who had an inexplicable habit of getting into the kitchen garden, and had twice consumed significant portions of the lavender she was trying to revive, was making his displeasure with the night known in a long, mournful note. Sylvia let out a breath that she had perhaps been holding for some time. "All right," she said. They entered the letter into the public record on a Tuesday, in front of the county magistrate and 2 witnesses, and Mr. Graves and Harwick's solicitor, who had come back for the occasion with the expression of a man attending his own court-martial. Thomas read the acknowledgment aloud, in its entirety, in a voice that suggested he would be happy to repeat any portion of it for anyone who had not heard clearly the first time. Sylvia Elaine Bellamy, natural daughter of Aldous Bellamy, 3rd Duke of Ravenscroft, acknowledged. She stood in the back of the magistrate's office in a dress that was better than the gray one and tried to identify what she was feeling. It was not what she had expected. She had spent so many years imagining that this moment, if it ever came, would feel like rescue, like a door opening, like a held breath released all at once. It felt instead very quiet. It felt like something settling, like furniture that had been slightly wrong in a room for years and had finally been moved to where it had always been meant to stand. She was her father's daughter. She had always been her father's daughter. Now other people knew it too. His mother arrived the following week. Lady Ellery was 61 years old and had the posture of a woman who had spent 6 decades being right about things, and the patience of a woman who had spent those same 6 decades watching other people fail to realize it. She arrived with 2 trunks and a lady's maid and a very direct opinion about the state of the entrance hall that she delivered before she had fully removed her traveling coat. She met Sylvia at dinner. Thomas had not exactly prepared either of them for the other. He had mentioned to his mother that there had been a development regarding the late Duke's household. He had mentioned to Sylvia that his mother would be visiting for several weeks. Lady Ellery spent approximately 4 minutes studying Sylvia across the dinner table before she said, "My son tells me you've been managing the estate accounts." "I've been helping where I can," Sylvia said. It was the same answer she had given Thomas on the first day. He noticed that she noticed him notice. "He also tells me," Lady Ellery said, "that you know the water rights dispute with Calderfield going back 40 years. My father believed in thorough record-keeping." "The 3rd Duke was many things," Lady Ellery said. "Thorough was not among the words I would have used." She looked at Thomas. "She's better than you deserve." Thomas, who had attended 30 years of his mother's dinners, took this as the compliment it was. It was a Sunday in October, 5 months after he had arrived at Ravenscroft, that he asked her to walk with him to the East Field. He had a reason. There was a question about the drainage progress that he had wanted to see for himself, but she knew, and he knew that she knew, that he could have gone alone. They walked along the field's edge in the thin autumn light and looked at the progress Holbrook had made on the drainage channels, and Thomas asked the questions he'd meant to ask, and she answered them. And then they stood for a while in the kind of quiet that is only possible between people who have run out of the need to fill it. "I have been thinking," he said, "about the spring planting calendar." "So have I," she said. "I'd like your opinion on the winter wheat rotation." "I have several opinions on the winter wheat rotation." "I know, that's why I'm asking." She looked at him. The wind had pulled a piece of hair loose from its pins, and she pushed it back, a gesture so familiar and unconsidered that he thought she had probably made it 1,000 times on this same field, looking at this same flat expanse of Lincolnshire sky. "Thomas," she said. She had taken to using his name sometime in the 3rd month, in the particular way of a person who has stopped keeping track of the precise moment a formality dissolved. "Sylvia, I want to stay," she said. "I want that to be known. Whatever else, whatever you're working up to, I want you to know that I'm not asking for rescue, and I'm not asking for a solution. I'm asking to stay." He looked at her for a moment. "I know," he said. "I want to ask you something else." She waited. "I want to ask if you'll let me work up to it at my own pace," he said. "Because I'm going to, regardless, but I'd rather do it properly." A pause. Then, very quietly, "How long is your pace generally?" "I'm told I'm thorough." She laughed. It was the first time he had heard her laugh in a way that was not polite or careful. A real laugh, sudden and brief, and she turned away toward the field as if to collect herself. He stood there in the October light and thought that he had not, in 31 years and one impulsive land purchase, been particularly right about very many things. He thought he might be getting better at it. They married the following April, on a Saturday that began with rain and ended in weak but earnest sunshine in the small church at the edge of the village where her father was buried and where Sylvia had attended services her whole life in the third pew from the back, in the particular position of someone who belongs to a place and has never been sure whether the place knows it. The pew assignment was different now. Wellington, the bull, escaped the home farm pasture sometime during the wedding breakfast, and was found 40 minutes later standing in the middle of the kitchen garden with a length of young rosemary in his mouth and an expression of profound personal satisfaction. 3 of the tenant's children were briefly deputized to return him to his field. He went, eventually, at his own pace. Sylvia stood in the entrance hall afterward, the entrance hall that Lady Ellery had criticized on arrival, and that had since been rehung with better curtains and a small landscape painting that Thomas had found at auction and which was not a masterpiece but had good bones, and looked at the house that was hers, now in a way that was documented and witnessed and permanent. She had been told, once, by a solicitor's letter she should not have read, that her mother had loved this house from the first time she saw it, had said it felt like a place she had come from, not a place she had come to. Sylvia had never told anyone that. She had held it for 20 years, like something fragile, something that could only survive in the particular silence of being kept. She let it out now. She let it stand in the sunlight coming through the rehung curtains, in the entrance hall of the house she had grown up in, next to the man who had read a letter and then done something about it. It turned out to be less fragile than she had thought.